Have you ever felt like no matter what you do, it's never enough? No matter how much you achieve, there's always a next step. That every failure feels like it's going to be the end of the world. Today, we're going to talk about it. I personally am a recovering perfectionist, and I am completely going to blow my cover today. For most of my life, I've used goal setting and achievement to hide. If there's an uncomfortable situation, I'm avoiding it, whether it's with myself, with someone else, but my excuse is always that I am really busy or I'm working. And to be honest, it's worked out pretty well for me. My addiction to perfection and achievement has been my foolproof way to mask my emotions for years until simply it wasn't anymore. For so long, really, my need for perfection, my need to achieve was a way to mask my insecurity. And I was always moving the bar higher. Just when I thought, like, oh, yeah, this is going to make me feel really good, I would get there, feel really empty. And then it's okay, it's on to the next thing rather than really dealing with what was going on. For so many people in my life, it's always just looked like I am a really high achieving, goal oriented person. And that is a big part of my personality, but I've definitely used it as a crutch. We are our own worst critics. I think that from an outside perspective, we will do things, we will say things, we will complete things, and they will look really great to the outside world. But I know I'm not alone here when you'll look at something and say, I could have done so much better. And just like that, the bar is raised again. One of the quotes that I remember hearing when I was younger, I think I stayed up way too late watching TV far too often, but I remember it was some sort of TV show and it was Cher, like 70s Cher, long black dark hair down to her waist, very tan, that Cher. But she was weighing out food to make a sandwich and she saw what the calories were going to be or whatever. And then she decided to take a bunch off. And then she says, I always tell my mother, you can never be too rich and never too thin. And for some reason, that idea just stuck with me. It was almost like not hitting the mark for me was never an option. And even if I had accomplished what I set out to do, I felt like I had failed. And this feeling of never quite being enough, and not even for the people around me, but enough for myself, was it was like the world felt like it was constantly ending eternally. And I realized in that moment when the high achieving, the goal setting, avoiding all of the hard things by just working wasn't working anymore, that a lot of this played out in the conversations that I had with myself. And so the first time I realized that the conversations that I was having with myself were playing a bigger impact than I had realized was when I was at the Freedom Conference. So if you're not familiar with ARC churches, a lot of them participate in this curriculum to find freedom in Christ. And you go through a 13-week book study, and it's really beautiful and amazing. And it really tests your faith, why you believe the way you believe, and then how you're tying your personal experiences. And it really just deepens your relationship with God. It's a beautiful experience, but it makes you do some really hard work. And so I was at the Freedom Conference and they were talking about pride. And I've never looked at myself as a prideful person. Yes, I take a lot of care in the way I look, my home, but in my head, I'm like, oh, that's just good stewardship, right? You want to take care of your home. You want to take care of your body. You want to make sure you present yourself well. But when it was explained that insecurity is a form of pride, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I never looked at my high expectations, my feelings of not enoughness as pride, but the reality is my negative self-talk, my feelings of not quite being enough, I was speaking down on God's creation. How dare I say that what God created was not good enough? And so that kind of started my journey in really paying attention to what I told myself, how I spoke to myself, the words I used with others. And it led me into kind of diving into Ephesians and having more conversations with God and really focusing on what God says about me and what God's truths are. And it still just wasn't sitting with me. And even though I got better, I wasn't at my best. And I remember, and I still ask myself all the time when I think about situations, I'm like, Laurel, is your pride showing? And so it wasn't until I read The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown that I had an experience that really shook me to my core. And so negative self-talk is really a slippery slope, right? It starts as one thing, goes into another, and before you know it, you're saying all types of things to yourself that you would never say to anyone else. There is an aspect, maybe it wasn't in this book, but there's an aspect I want to discuss. Um, when we think about negative self-talk, it's not necessarily like, it doesn't always have to be horrible things like, oh, about the way you look or, your abilities. It can be talking down to yourself for simply being human. And so one of the concepts, there's two books I'm going to talk about today, and that's The Gifts of Imperfection and Getting Past Your Breakup. I'll link them in the comments. But the concept is that so many of us walk around being really mean to ourselves for simply being human. So I want you to think about it this way. When you forget something at home, you forget your keys, you forget your phone, you forget your jacket, you forget an umbrella. A lot of us will simply say, oh my God, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I forgot my keys. But the reality is you're not stupid for forgetting your keys. That is a very human interaction with all of the things that go through our heads on a regular basis. It's not a big deal that you forgot your keys, just go get them. And so often we're mistaking just simply the things that we go through as human and labeling them as negative or bad or stupid or whatever it may be. And so it's not about being stupid. It's just about being human. And so the second piece that goes deeper, and this is Brene Brown, and it's the concept of the story I'm telling myself. And so Brene Brown talks about engaging with her husband in the gifts of imperfection. And she talks about how a scenario will then lead to her mind crafting a completely different scenario where there's negative emotion involved and things that have happened that feel like they've happened, but definitely haven't happened. And it's the story that you tell yourself in your mind. And it isn't until you get it out that you realize how crazy it is. And so I've often realized how I've told myself the worst case scenario before it's even happened. And then if it does happen, it's like living through it twice. And so this concept of being able to take the negative self-talk and realize that it's a story I'm telling myself really played out my business in the past few weeks. And so one of our largest clients, our second largest client at Queen Lee Consulting, um, a couple of things transpired and they told me that they were going to be late on their payment. And so I'm like, okay, that's fine. Will you have it paid before the first of the following month? And they said, yes, absolutely. I'm going to do my best. I have a good relationship with this client. So doing my best, you're my priority. Took that to heart and I was okay. Days passed, weeks passed, no payment. And in a business that was getting ready to make their next hire, now being in over a $10,000 deficit, I was crushed. And the story in my head started. I told myself, oh my gosh, my business is going to close. I'm not going to be able to pay my employees. I'm going to have to fire. I'm going to be stretched thin. I'm going to have to take on all this extra work so I can keep everything afloat. And I just simply started to spiral into all of the horrible things that could happen instead of taking a moment to breathe, looking at what was really happening in the business and realizing that it was a blessing. The reality is my business is fine. We were able to take out our first business loan, which in reality felt really good that I was able to get a business loan to have some working capital. We are no longer working with a client that wasn't a great fit. And there's been a couple open doors to some new contracts that are really incredible fits for our company and are going to position us in a new space. But when we start to spiral, the story we tell ourselves is that all of the worst things that we could think of are exactly what's going to happen. And so, using positive self talk as a tool and catching yourself in that negative self talk is the first step to really shifting your mindset and how the power of affirmations can have an impact on basically every aspect of your life. And so in those situations in business, one of the things that I've had to start asking myself when I feel like I'm slipping into a place of lack is, do I have enough for today? And the shift in my mindset has allowed me to think more rationally and make decisions where I don't have to be so forward thinking. I don't have to be so focused on the worst case scenario. I can simply live in today and be reminded by, it's the passage, I don't know, I should know it, but God takes care of the lilies and the birds. Are you not as important as them? And the reality is, yes, I am. And I have exactly what I need to get through for today. And so that's been a huge shift. And not only business, but I think my personal life as well. And so I mentioned the power of affirmations, and that's really what this is all getting to. And so we've all talked about or heard people talk about affirmations and, you know, speaking positive things over yourself and speaking things into existence. And there's a part of affirmations that is most definitely that. But what affirmations really are their messages fed to your subconscious mind about your identity. The subconscious doesn't know the difference between reality and suggestive thinking. It takes everything literally. And so when we dive into what understanding the subconscious and really how positive self-talk and negative self-talk can impact us on a deeper level, on a subconscious level, the subconscious understands only discrete, easy concepts. It takes statements literally. So if something is, you take a statement literally, imagine saying, I'm so stupid. Think about how that has an impact on your subconscious. It doesn't know the difference between reality and suggestive, knows only the present, does not understand negative phrasing. It's in the moment, responds very well to visualization, importance of storytelling right there, responds to repetition and imprints repetitive messages and does not unimprint easily. So your subconscious can be programmed through repeated suggestions, but it can be programmed in a way that can positively impact you and move you forward, or negatively impact you and keep you stuck where you are. And so for me, when I started to think about the way the subconscious is described, I started to think about, wow, like your subconscious is your inner child. Think about it. Like when you talk to a child, kids only understand easy concepts. They take things literally all the time. They don't know the difference between reality and suggestive. That's why for a kid, dreaming about being Superman or a mermaid or something crazy when they grow up is very possible to them. The understanding the negative phrasing, I think we've all heard the stories where you shouldn't tell your kids, don't drop that, and then they drop it, right? But if you shift it to, um, oh, you're doing a great job, steady hands, or something like that, it has a positive impact and they're more confident and they carry the very full glass to the sink without dropping it. Responding very well to visualization. Kids respond so well to storytelling and their imaginations can really run wild. And when you think about when you speak with a child and when you're teaching them something, the repetition comes into play. And so all of these things led me to believe that really the subconscious is your inner child. And the same way a child believes everything you tell them, your subconscious is extremely impressionable to what you say about yourself. And so if you are constantly repeating negative things, even things as negative as I'm a failure, your subconscious is going to believe it. And that's a hard pill to swallow because I know just from conversations that I've had with other women, the stories we tell ourselves, the things we tell ourselves are often not very nice. And so there was a space in Brené's book that if I had been standing, and this is the gifts of imperfection, if I had been standing, it's probably a portion of the book that would have brought me to my knees. But thank God I was in the bathtub, right? Didn't have to worry about that. But the passage of the book talks about how we downplay our accomplishments to protect ourselves from disappointment. I am famous for really infamous for downplaying my accomplishments and not being willing to celebrate. And it's all because, number one, I felt like I'm bragging if I talk about my accomplishments or if I want to celebrate my accomplishments, right? There's that weird relationship with pride there. And then there's that worry about being judged if you want to celebrate something, you're excited about something and it doesn't go as planned. But the reality is whether it happens or not, whether you celebrate it or not, the outcome is going to be the same. And if it wasn't what you were expecting, you're going to experience disappointment no matter what. And the disappointment you have in yourself is usually much stronger, much more impactful than the disappointment anybody else would have around you. I'm sure if you were speaking with somebody else, they'd be like, oh my gosh, like, don't worry about it. It'll happen next time. Man, you should have got that. Like, when's the next time you can do it? Something like that. People around us are often so encouraging. And so reading that, and I probably read it 6 times over and over again and cried the whole time. But it made me realize that there were little pieces of me, little pieces of my inner child that throughout the years needed some healing because some negative things had been spoken over me in those seasons. And a lot of those negative things were spoken over me by myself. And so in the process of trying to understand, right? Because all of this happened over a course of a few years. I didn't learn about this. I didn't come to these realizations overnight. This was just doing the work over and over again in my personal life over the past 3 years. And so before I launched the Business Growth Bootcamp and the Boss to Art podcast, there were parts of me that felt really insecure about taking those steps. I knew I was called, right? But I didn't feel equipped. I didn't feel worthy. I really felt like I had no business being behind a camera. And so, in true fashion, because everything is content, I had a photographer come to my first day of filming. So, it was the first day of filming for the course. And then we were kind of idealizing what the podcast could be. And after all was said and done and we got the content, about 2 weeks later, she sent me kind of a compilation video. And if you follow me on social media, you've probably seen it. but it was just kind of this launch video. And when I watched it, I cried. And I don't know if it was, I don't know if it was tears of joy necessarily. I don't know if it was just a realization, but all I know is that I saw a woman in that video who had overcome so much. But even though she had overcome so much, she had accomplished so much, I had been so mean to her in the process. Myself, I was mean to me, and it made me think, if I had been more encouraging to myself, if I had been willing to take a moment to celebrate some of these milestones in the business, milestones in life, how much further would I have been, or how much more confident would I have been getting behind the camera? And so in that moment, I told myself that this is it. I can no longer talk shit to myself. Like, that's what it is. I can't do it anymore. And I'm a huge proponent for positive self-talk and affirmations. And so there is a way to write affirmations, and that's what we're going to end with. And so in Getting Past Your Breakup by Susan J. Elliott, no, I'm not in a breakup. It's just a really good book. She emphasizes that affirmations should be clear, positive, and present focused. So here's how to write proper affirmations according to her advice, and it's been really impactful in my journey. So number one, use present tense. So affirmation should be phrased in the present moment. Instead of using I will be, say I am. Number two, be specific. Focus on what you want to achieve. Use very descriptive language. That visualization aspect really comes into play here. Number three, keep it positive. Avoid negative words. For example, so you're going to say, I am confident versus stating, I am not insecure. And then four, keep it simple. Because remember, that subconscious that you are retraining to speak life into you, for you to speak life into yourself, that's your inner child. You don't have to make it complicated. It's just got to be easily understood. And the affirmations are affirmations you should feel at your very core. And so, some examples of good affirmations: I am worthy of love and respect. It's positive, specific, and it's present focused. I trust myself to make the best decisions for my life. It builds confidence and self-trust, which are both extremely important in the entrepreneurial journey. I am becoming stronger every day. It's positive and it's focused on growth. Some affirmations, examples of affirmations that may not work as well: I won't fail at this task. It uses that negative phrasing that our inner child doesn't necessarily understand, which really creates confusion in the subconscious mind. I will be successful someday. It's kind of a weak affirmation. It's future focused, and it really delays the power of that positivity that you're speaking over yourself. Number three, I am not weak. The focus is on the negative, which is the weakness, versus affirming your strength by saying, I am strong. So in the process of shifting my mindset, I've realized how brutal I've been to myself. And in some of the things I've told myself, the reality is I would never say that to someone else. And so it's been a practice that I've implemented. If there's something that I'm repeating in my head over and over again, I say it out loud, and I say it out loud to check to see how crazy it actually sounds and put myself back in my place. I really believe that every version of myself still lives with me, and there are things that previous versions of myself need to hear. 5-year-old Laurel, 12-year-old Laurel, 21-year-old Laurel, 30-year-old Laurel. There are things that not only myself, but I know if you're listening, there are things that you've spoken over yourself over the years that are going to take some time to undo. But what I hope is that we can normalize that, hey, we've all been here, but we can encourage each other to take the steps to stop the negative self talk and really start to speak life over ourselves. As always, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Boss Too Hard podcast. I hope you found this valuable. I hope at some point in this conversation you checked yourself and really asked about the conversations you've been having with yourself and are willing to take a step forward to make a positive change and speak life over yourself. Have a great week.